Let me start with a strange observation about human beings, including you. Almost everyone believes they are a rational person. You probably believe this about yourself as well. You imagine that when you make decisions, you examine the facts, think carefully, and choose what makes the most sense. In other words, you trust your mind. But if human beings were truly as rational as we like to believe, the world would look very different. People would not destroy friendships over small misunderstandings. They would not ruin careers because of one impulsive moment. They would not make decisions in anger and regret them only hours later. And yet, this happens every single day. Now think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever said something in the heat of an argument and immediately wished you could take it back? Have you ever made a decision that felt absolutely right in the moment, only to realize later that it made no sense at all? Maybe you bought something you didn't really need, trusted someone you barely knew, or rejected an opportunity because of a sudden emotional reaction. If you are honest, you will probably recognize many of these moments, and that realization leads us directly to the first and most important principle in understanding human behavior, the law of irrationality. Here is the truth that most people do not like to hear. Human beings are not primarily rational creatures. We are emotional creatures who occasionally use reason. Emotion moves first, and logic usually arrives afterward. But instead of questioning the emotion, logic often serves it. It becomes a tool that helps justify whatever we are already feeling. In other words, when you feel something strongly, your mind begins searching for reasons to prove that feeling is correct. This is why arguments between people can become so intense. Each person believes they are defending the truth, but in reality they are defending a feeling. The anger, pride, or fear that arises in the moment pushes the mind to construct explanations that make the emotion appear reasonable. From the outside, this behavior can look irrational, but from the inside, it feels perfectly justified. Understanding this law changes the way you see both yourself and other people. It reveals that many conflicts, mistakes, and regrets in life are not caused by a lack of intelligence. They are caused by emotions quietly steering the mind. Once you begin to recognize this pattern, you start to notice it everywhere in conversations, in politics, in business decisions, and even in your own private thoughts. And the more clearly you see it, the more power you gain over your own reactions. Because the real goal here is not to eliminate emotion. That would be impossible. Emotion is part of what makes us human. But when you become aware of how easily emotions distort judgment, you create a small but powerful distance between what you feel and what you do. And in that space between feeling and action lies the beginning of wisdom. Let me ask you to consider something about the people you meet every day. When someone speaks to you, are they truly listening to you? Or are they simply waiting for their turn to talk? If you observe closely, you will notice that most conversations are not really exchanges of understanding. They are performances. Each person is subtly directing the spotlight back toward themselves, toward their experiences, their opinions, their struggles, their importance. This tendency is so common that we barely notice it anymore. Yet it reveals one of the deepest forces shaping human behavior, the law of narcissism. Narcissism is often misunderstood. When people hear the word, they imagine an arrogant person obsessed with their appearance or constantly seeking admiration. But narcissism, in its broader psychological sense, is something far more universal. It is the natural tendency of the human mind to be preoccupied with itself. Every person lives inside the small universe of their own thoughts, memories, fears, and desires. Because of this, the world naturally appears to revolve around them. Their problems feel larger than anyone else's. Their perspective feels more accurate than opposing viewpoints. Their emotions seem more urgent and more justified. This inward focus does not necessarily make someone selfish or cruel. It simply reflects how human consciousness works. From the moment you are born, your attention is directed inward. As a child, your needs demand immediate attention. Hunger, discomfort, fear, and curiosity dominate your experience. As you grow older, society begins to teach you empathy, the ability to recognize that other people have inner worlds just as complex as your own. But this ability develops unevenly. Some individuals learn to extend their awareness outward, becoming sensitive to the emotions and experiences of others. Others remain trapped within a narrow self-focus, interpreting everything through the lens of their own ego. This is why narcissism exists on a spectrum. At one end of this spectrum lies healthy narcissism. This is the balanced form of self-regard that allows you to value yourself without losing awareness of others. Healthy narcissism gives you confidence. It allows you to pursue goals, express ideas, and defend your boundaries without feeling worthless or overly dependent on approval. People with healthy narcissism possess a stable sense of identity. They can appreciate praise without becoming addicted to it, and they can accept criticism without collapsing into insecurity. Most importantly, they maintain empathy, the ability to step outside their own perspective and imagine what others might be feeling. But as narcissism intensifies, the balance begins to shift. The more a person becomes absorbed in themselves, the less attention remains available for understanding others. In more extreme forms, narcissism distorts perception entirely. Other people are no longer seen as individuals with their own needs and emotions. Instead, they become tools, mirrors, or obstacles in the narcissist's personal story. Their value is measured by how they reflect admiration, support, or validation back to the narcissist. Robert Greene describes several forms this exaggerated narcissism can take. One type is the theatrical narcissist, the person who constantly seeks attention and admiration. Their presence is dramatic, expressive, and captivating. But beneath the surface lies a deep hunger for recognition. Another type is the passive narcissist, who may appear shy or insecure, but is still intensely focused on how others perceive them. Their self-absorption is quieter but no less powerful. Then there is the grandiose narcissist, who genuinely believes in their superiority and entitlement. They see themselves as exceptional and deserving of special treatment. While these types differ in outward behavior, they share the same underlying trait, an exaggerated focus on the self. Understanding this law is not just about identifying narcissists in others, it is also about recognizing the same tendencies within yourself. The mind has a natural habit of exaggerating your importance and minimizing the perspectives of others. For example, when someone disagrees with you, your first instinct might be to assume they misunderstand the situation. When someone criticizes you, it is tempting to believe they are jealous or unfair, rather than considering that their feedback might contain truth. These reactions are subtle expressions of narcissism. They protect your ego by filtering reality through a self-centered lens. The challenge, then, is learning to expand your awareness beyond this narrow focus. The most effective antidote to narcissism is empathy. Empathy requires an effort that does not come automatically. It means pausing long enough to consider the inner world of another person. It means recognizing that the emotions driving someone else's behavior may be just as intense and meaningful to them as yours are to you. When you cultivate empathy, you gradually loosen the grip of narcissism because your attention shifts outward. This shift has profound consequences for relationships. A person dominated by narcissism struggles to maintain genuine connections. Their conversations revolve around themselves. Their reactions prioritize their own feelings. Over time, people around them begin to feel unseen or unimportant. In contrast, someone who develops empathy becomes unusually perceptive. They notice subtle changes in tone, expression, and behavior. They listen carefully instead of preparing their next response. This attentiveness creates trust, and trust forms the foundation of strong personal and professional relationships. Empathy also provides a powerful strategic advantage. When you understand what others feel and desire, you gain insight into their motivations. Instead of reacting only from your own perspective, you begin to anticipate the emotional dynamics shaping their decisions. This ability allows you to communicate more effectively, resolve conflicts more calmly, and build influence without manipulation. Yet mastering this balance requires constant self-observation. Narcissism does not disappear completely. It simply becomes something you learn to manage. Whenever you feel the urge to dominate a conversation, to defend your ego at all costs, or to interpret every situation in terms of how it affects you, That is the moment to pause. Ask yourself whether you are truly seeing the other person or merely projecting your own concerns onto them. Over time, this awareness reshapes how you move through the world. Instead of being trapped inside the echo chamber of your own mind, you begin to perceive the complexity of human experience around you. Each person you encounter carries their own fears, ambitions, memories, and insecurities, an entire internal landscape invisible from the outside. Recognizing this fact softens judgment and deepens understanding. The law of narcissism ultimately reveals a paradox about human nature. Every person begins life at the center of their own universe. Yet maturity requires gradually stepping outside that center. The more you expand your attention beyond yourself, the clearer your perception of reality becomes. And in that expanded awareness lies the possibility of deeper relationships, wiser decisions, and a far more accurate understanding of the people who share this world with you. Let me invite you to notice something subtle about your everyday life. From the moment you wake up and step into the world, you begin to play a role. When you speak to a colleague, you present a certain version of yourself: professional, composed, perhaps slightly restrained. When you are with close friends, that role shifts. You might become more relaxed, more humorous, more expressive. When you are with family, yet another version appears. Without realizing it, you move through the day, changing tone, language, posture, and even personality depending on the situation. At first glance, this may seem deceptive, but it is actually one of the most natural aspects of human behavior. This is the essence of the law of role-playing. Human beings are deeply social creatures. From early childhood, we begin learning how to behave in different environments. A child quickly discovers that certain behaviors are rewarded while others are discouraged. Smiling might bring praise. Acting politely might earn approval. Over time, these experiences shape the roles we adopt. We learn to adjust ourselves to fit expectations. In school, we play the role of the student. In the workplace, we become the professional. Among friends, we take on the role of companion. In confidant, or entertainer. These roles help us navigate complex social environments where cooperation and acceptance are essential. Think about the idea of a mask. The word often carries a negative meaning, suggesting dishonesty or manipulation. But in social life, masks serve an important function. They allow individuals to maintain harmony and structure within groups. Imagine a world where everyone expressed every thought and impulse exactly as it appeared in their mind. Conversations would quickly collapse into chaos. Relationships would be fragile and unpredictable. The small adjustments people make to their behavior, the masks they wear, create a layer of stability that allows society to function. However, the law of role-playing becomes more complicated when we look beneath the surface. While adopting roles is natural, problems arise when people become completely identified with the mask they present. When the gap between a person's public persona and their inner self becomes too large, tension begins to grow. The individual may feel trapped by the expectations attached to that role. For example, someone who presents themselves as constantly confident and successful might feel unable to admit vulnerability or uncertainty. Over time, this pressure can create stress, emotional exhaustion, and even a loss of personal identity. Robert Greene explains that people often design their social roles very carefully. Sometimes this happens consciously. A leader might cultivate an image of authority and calm in order to inspire confidence. A performer might amplify certain aspects of their personality to capture attention. In other cases, the process is unconscious. People gradually shape their public image based on feedback from others. If certain behaviors receive approval, they repeat them. If certain traits bring admiration, they emphasize those traits even more. Slowly, a recognizable persona forms. Understanding this dynamic allows you to see social life with greater clarity. When you meet someone for the first time, you are rarely encountering their full personality. You are meeting the role they have chosen or learned to present. The charming coworker may hide insecurity. The quiet observer might possess strong opinions they simply choose not to reveal immediately. The confident leader could privately struggle with doubt. The mask does not necessarily mean the person is fake. It simply means you are seeing a curated version of their identity designed to function in a particular context. This awareness also invites you to examine your own behavior. Consider the roles you regularly perform. Perhaps you play the responsible one in your family, the agreeable one in your social circle, or the ambitious one in your workplace. Each of these roles carries expectations, and over time you may begin shaping your actions to maintain them. The danger arises when you feel unable to step outside that identity. If your role becomes too rigid, it can limit your ability to grow and adapt. At the same time, mastering the law of role-playing can become a powerful skill. The key is not to reject roles altogether, but to become conscious of them. When you understand that social interactions involve a form of performance, you gain flexibility. You can adjust your behavior intentionally rather than automatically. For instance, certain situations may require confidence, others patience, and others humility. By observing how different roles influence outcomes, you develop the ability to choose the most effective approach. Observation plays a critical role in this process. Pay attention to how people behave in various environments. Notice how leaders command attention through posture and tone. Observe how skilled communicators adapt their language depending on who they are speaking with. These subtle shifts reveal the mechanics of social influence. The more carefully you watch, the more you begin to recognize patterns in how roles operate. Yet even while learning to navigate these dynamics, authenticity remains essential. If people sense that your role is entirely artificial, trust quickly disappears. Authentic role-playing means allowing your real character to remain visible beneath the mask. The role becomes an extension of who you are rather than a complete disguise. In other words, the mask should amplify certain aspects of your personality, not replace them entirely. Consider the difference between someone who exaggerates confidence to hide insecurity and someone who expresses genuine confidence while still acknowledging limitations. The first person may appear impressive at first, but eventually reveals inconsistency. The second person feels trustworthy because their role aligns with their inner character. This alignment creates credibility, and credibility strengthens influence. Another important aspect of this law is perception. In social life, how others perceive you often shapes opportunities and outcomes. People form impressions quickly based on visible behavior. If you consistently present yourself as thoughtful and capable, others begin to associate you with those qualities. If you appear disorganized or unreliable, those impressions also become part of your social identity. By becoming aware of the roles you project, you gain greater control over how your actions influence perception. Ultimately, the law of role-playing reveals that social life resembles a complex stage where every individual participates in a continuous performance. The goal is not to eliminate this performance, but to perform it with awareness. When you understand the masks people wear, including your own, you begin to see beyond surface appearances. You become less easily deceived by exaggerated personas and less constrained by rigid expectations. In that awareness lies a new level of freedom. Instead of being unconsciously shaped by roles assigned by others, you can shape the roles you play with intention. You remain adaptable without losing authenticity. You interact with others while recognizing the invisible theater that surrounds every conversation. And as you learn to balance performance with sincerity, you move through social life with greater intelligence, flexibility, and control. Let me ask you to think about a pattern in your life, not a single event, but something that seems to repeat itself again and again. Perhaps you keep ending up in the same type of relationship. Maybe you promise yourself that you will stop procrastinating, yet somehow you fall back into the same habit, or you react to certain situations with the same emotion every time: anger, anxiety, or the need to control. At first, these moments appear unrelated, as if each one simply happened by chance. But if you step back and observe your life more carefully, you might begin to notice a quiet pattern beneath the surface. This pattern is not random. It is the result of what Robert Greene calls the law of compulsive behavior. Human beings like to believe that they are making fresh decisions every day. We imagine that each action comes from conscious choice, yet much of what we do is driven by invisible scripts formed long before we became aware of them. These scripts are shaped by early experiences, emotional wounds, and the ways we learn to cope with stress or uncertainty. Over time, these responses become habits, and habits gradually turn into compulsions. The mind repeats them automatically, even when they no longer serve us. To understand this law, you must first recognize that the mind is deeply influenced by the past. Childhood experiences in particular leave strong emotional imprints. When a child encounters fear, neglect, excessive pressure, or even overwhelming praise, the mind searches for strategies to adapt. Some children learn to become perfectionists in order to avoid criticism. Others develop an intense need for approval because affection once felt uncertain. Some individuals respond to instability by trying to control every aspect of their environment. These responses may help the child survive emotionally at the time, but they do not simply disappear as adulthood begins. Instead, they quietly remain in the background, shaping behavior in ways the adult may not fully understand. Consider the person who constantly seeks approval. On the surface, their actions appear generous or cooperative. They may go out of their way to please others, always saying yes, always trying to avoid conflict. But beneath this behavior often lies an old emotional pattern, a fear of rejection that formed earlier in life. The mind repeats the same strategy. If others approve of me, I will feel safe. Over time, this pattern becomes so automatic that the person hardly notices it, yet it influences their choices, their relationships, and even their career. Another common example is the need for control. Some individuals feel an intense discomfort when things are uncertain. They may organize every detail, monitor every process, and struggle to delegate responsibility. While this may appear as discipline or competence, it can also be a compulsion rooted in past experiences where control once felt necessary for emotional security. The mind repeats the same behavior again and again, attempting to recreate the sense of safety it once provided. Perfectionism is another powerful form of compulsive behavior. The perfectionist believes that if they can just achieve the flawless result, they will finally feel satisfied. Yet the opposite usually occurs. Each achievement raises the standard higher, and the person becomes trapped in an endless cycle of pressure and dissatisfaction. The behavior appears rational after all. Striving for excellence is often praised, but the emotional drive beneath it reveals a deeper compulsion. These patterns demonstrate an important truth about human nature. People are often less free in their choices than they believe. What feels like independent decision-making is frequently the repetition of familiar emotional responses. The mind prefers what is known, even if it is painful. A familiar struggle can feel safer than an unfamiliar possibility. Recognizing these patterns requires a certain level of self-observation. It means stepping back and examining your life, not as a series of isolated events, but as a story with recurring themes. Ask yourself whether similar problems keep appearing in different forms. Do you repeatedly encounter the same conflicts with different people? Do you sabotage opportunities at the moment they begin to succeed? Do certain emotional reactions arise so quickly that you barely have time to question them? These repeating signals often reveal the presence of a deeper pattern. Once you begin to see the pattern, you gain an important advantage. Awareness weakens the power of compulsion. When a behavior operates unconsciously, it feels automatic and inevitable. But when you recognize the underlying pattern, you create a moment of distance between the impulse and the action. In that moment, you have the opportunity to choose a different response. This is where practices such as reflection and mindfulness become valuable. By paying attention to your reactions in real time, you start noticing the emotional triggers that activate old patterns. Perhaps criticism triggers defensiveness, or uncertainty triggers anxiety. Instead of immediately reacting, you pause. You observe the emotion without allowing it to dictate your behavior. This pause interrupts the automatic cycle. Breaking compulsive patterns also requires replacing them with healthier habits. The mind does not respond well to empty space. If you simply try to suppress a behavior without offering an alternative, the old pattern tends to return. Instead, you gradually train yourself to respond differently. The person who constantly seeks approval may begin practicing honest disagreement in small situations. The perfectionist may deliberately allow imperfections in certain tasks to reduce the pressure of unrealistic standards. These small adjustments slowly reshape the mind's expectations. Support from others can also play a crucial role in this process. Friends, mentors, or therapists often notice patterns that the individual struggles to see alone. Their perspective acts as an external mirror, reflecting behaviors that have become invisible through familiarity. While it can be uncomfortable to confront these truths, the insight they provide is often the beginning of meaningful change. Ultimately, the law of compulsive behavior teaches you that personal freedom is not simply about making choices in the moment. True freedom requires understanding the invisible forces that shape those choices. When you recognize the emotional patterns guiding your actions, you begin to loosen their grip. Instead of repeating the same unconscious responses, you gain the ability to respond with greater awareness. Over time, this awareness transforms the way you experience your own behavior. What once felt like uncontrollable reactions becomes something you can observe and gradually reshape. The past no longer dictates every response. You begin to act with intention rather than habit. And in that shift from unconscious repetition to conscious choice, you reclaim a deeper level of control over your life. Let me begin with a question that most people rarely ask themselves honestly. When you desire something, more money, a higher position, a better relationship, recognition, admiration, how much of that desire truly comes from within you, and how much of it appears only after you see someone else possessing it? If you observe your own reactions carefully, you may notice something surprising. Many of the things you suddenly want in life did not originate from a deep internal calling. They appeared the moment you saw another person enjoying them. This quiet psychological force is what Robert Greene describes as the law of covetousness. Human beings are natural comparers. From childhood, the mind begins measuring itself against others. A child notices which classmate receives praise, which one owns the newest toy, which one gains the most attention. These comparisons rarely stop in adulthood. Instead, they evolve into more sophisticated forms. We compare careers, houses, lifestyles, achievements, popularity, influence, and even happiness. At first glance, this might seem harmless, even motivating, but beneath this behavior lies a deeper emotional mechanism. When we see something desirable in another person's life, the mind interprets it as evidence that we are lacking something important. The result is a subtle feeling of incompleteness, followed by the urge to obtain whatever the other person possesses. This is the essence of covetousness, the intense desire to possess what belongs to someone else. It is not simply ambition or aspiration. It is desire triggered by comparison. The difference is subtle but powerful. When ambition comes from genuine interest or purpose, it tends to feel constructive and energizing. But when desire is born from comparison, it often carries a hidden emotional tension. Instead of focusing on personal growth, the mind becomes preoccupied with closing the perceived gap between you and someone else. Modern society amplifies this tendency enormously. Everywhere you look, images of success, wealth, beauty, and achievement appear constantly. Social media displays carefully curated glimpses of other people's lives. News stories celebrate extraordinary accomplishments. Advertising encourages you to imagine a better version of yourself through ownership, status, or appearance. With each comparison, the mind quietly asks the same question: why do they have that, and I do not? Over time, this question can evolve into envy, dissatisfaction, and restlessness. You might begin to believe that happiness lies just beyond the next acquisition, the next promotion, the next purchase, the next symbol of success. Yet once you obtain the thing you desired, the satisfaction often fades quickly. Another comparison appears, and the cycle begins again. This endless pursuit can leave people feeling strangely empty despite outward success. Covetousness can also influence how people relate to one another. Instead of appreciating others as individuals, the mind begins viewing them as competitors. Someone else's success may feel like a personal loss. When a colleague receives recognition, it may trigger resentment rather than admiration. When a friend achieves something impressive, the mind may quietly compare it with your own progress. These reactions are rarely expressed openly, but they shape emotions and relationships in powerful ways. At the same time, the law of covetousness is not entirely negative. Desire has always played an important role in human progress. The wish to improve one's circumstances drives creativity, innovation, and effort. Without some level of dissatisfaction, people might never challenge limitations or strive for greater achievements. The problem arises when desire becomes disconnected from genuine purpose and becomes instead a constant reaction to what others possess. The key to understanding this law lies in recognizing the difference between inspiration and envy. When you see someone succeed, two emotional responses are possible. One response says, "Their success shows what is possible. I can learn from their example." This reaction transforms comparison into motivation. The other response says, "Their success highlights my own inadequacy. I must catch up or surpass them." This reaction creates tension and dissatisfaction. Both reactions begin with comparison, but they lead to very different outcomes. Self-awareness is the first step in managing covetousness. Whenever you feel a strong desire for something, pause for a moment and ask yourself a simple question. Would I still want this if no one else possessed it? This question often reveals the true origin of the desire. If the answer is yes, the goal may reflect a genuine interest or value. But if the desire disappears without the presence of comparison, it may simply be the mind reacting to someone else's situation. Another powerful antidote to covetousness is gratitude. Gratitude shifts attention away from what is missing and toward what already exists. When the mind regularly acknowledges achievements, relationships, and opportunities already present in life, the urge to measure constantly against others weakens. Instead of chasing endless comparisons, you begin to recognize the uniqueness of your own path. Empathy can also transform the way you perceive others' success. When you look beyond appearances, you often discover that every achievement carries its own challenges, sacrifice, and struggles. The person you envy may be facing pressures you cannot see. The wealth you admire may have required years of effort or personal trade-offs. By understanding the full complexity of another person's journey, admiration can replace resentment. It is also important to remember that each individual's path unfolds under different circumstances. Talent, timing, opportunity, and environment vary greatly from one life to another. When you measure yourself strictly against someone else's timeline, you risk overlooking the progress unique to your own experience. True fulfillment rarely comes from surpassing others. It emerges from developing your own potential and contributing in ways that reflect your personal values. Ultimately, the law of covetousness reveals a paradox about human desire. Comparison is unavoidable. The mind will naturally notice what others have achieved or obtained. But the meaning you assign to those observations determines whether they become a source of frustration or inspiration. When desire is guided by awareness, it can push you toward growth and creativity. When it is driven blindly by comparison, it can trap you in endless dissatisfaction. Understanding this law allows you to step outside the constant race of comparison. Instead of chasing what others possess, you begin asking deeper questions about what truly matters to you. You become less reactive to external symbols of success and more attentive to your own direction. And as your attention shifts from competition to purpose, the restless pull of covetousness gradually loses its power over your decisions. Imagine standing at a crossroads where one path offers a small reward right now, and the other promises something far greater, but only after patience, effort, and uncertainty. If you observe human behavior honestly, you will notice something predictable. Most people choose the path with the immediate reward, not because they are foolish, and not because they lack intelligence, but because the human mind is naturally drawn toward what is visible, urgent, and emotionally satisfying in the present moment. The distant future, no matter how important, feels abstract and uncertain. This quiet bias toward the immediate is what Robert Greene calls the law of short-sightedness, and it shapes far more of our lives than we usually realize. Human beings evolved in environments where survival depended on responding quickly to immediate signals. A sudden noise in the bushes could mean danger, A nearby source of food had to be seized before it disappeared. In those conditions, reacting to the present moment was a powerful advantage. But the modern world is very different. Many of the most important decisions we face today involve consequences that unfold slowly over time: financial choices, career development, health habits, relationships, and long-term goals. Yet our instincts still pull us toward what feels rewarding right now, rather than what will matter years later. The result is a constant tension between immediate gratification and long-term benefit. You can see this pattern everywhere. Someone knows that saving money consistently will create stability in the future, yet the pleasure of spending today feels stronger than the distant reward of financial security. Another person understands that exercise and discipline will improve their health over decades, yet the comfort of rest in the present moment often wins. Even in relationships, short-sighted thinking can appear when someone reacts impulsively to temporary frustration instead of considering the long-term value of the connection. In each case, the mind focuses on what is emotionally vivid right now and underestimates the quiet power of time. The danger of short-sightedness is not always obvious in the beginning. In fact, short-term decisions often feel successful at first. Acting quickly can produce immediate relief or satisfaction. Avoiding a difficult task today can reduce stress in the moment. Pursuing quick gains can create the illusion of progress. But as time passes, the hidden cost begins to emerge. The postponed work accumulates. The neglected habits slowly erode health or stability. The impulsive decisions start shaping a future that feels increasingly difficult to control. What seemed like small choices in the present eventually reveal themselves as powerful forces shaping the direction of life. History provides many striking examples of this principle. Powerful leaders and ambitious individuals often achieve early success because of bold, decisive action. But when those actions are guided by impatience or short-term thinking, the same qualities that once created success can lead to downfall. Napoleon Bonaparte is often cited as an example of this dynamic. His early victories were built on strategic brilliance and decisive leadership. Yet his later campaigns revealed a growing tendency toward impulsive expansion and overconfidence. By focusing on immediate conquest rather than long-term sustainability, he eventually created the conditions for his own defeat. The pattern is clear. Short-sightedness rarely destroys success immediately, but over time it quietly undermines even the strongest positions. In everyday life, the effects are usually less dramatic but equally significant. Short-sightedness can trap people in cycles of reaction instead of strategy. Instead of shaping the future deliberately, they find themselves constantly responding to urgent situations created by earlier short-term choices. This reactive pattern drains energy and clarity. When every decision is driven by immediate pressure, there is little space left for long-term vision. The first step toward overcoming short-sightedness is awareness. You must recognize the subtle emotional pull that immediate rewards exert on the mind. When a decision feels urgent or tempting, it is worth asking a simple question: how will this choice look a year from now? This question shifts attention from the intensity of the present moment to the broader timeline of consequences. Often, the answer reveals that what feels compelling right now may actually carry long-term costs. Another powerful strategy is learning the discipline of delayed gratification. This does not mean rejecting pleasure or opportunity. It means developing the ability to pause before acting. By allowing time for reflection, you weaken the emotional urgency that drives impulsive choices. The mind becomes capable of evaluating outcomes more calmly and realistically. Over time, this habit strengthens self-control and strategic thinking. It is also helpful to cultivate what Green calls big-picture thinking. This involves stepping back from individual events and viewing them within the context of larger patterns. Instead of asking, "What will help me today?" the question becomes, "What direction is this choice pushing my life toward?" When decisions are evaluated according to their long-term impact, priorities become clearer. Short-term temptations lose some of their power because they no longer dominate the entire field of vision. Patience is another essential element in escaping the trap of short-sightedness. In a world that celebrates speed and immediate results, patience can appear almost outdated. Yet many of the most meaningful achievements in life require long periods of consistent effort without immediate reward. Building expertise, establishing trust, developing relationships, and creating lasting success all depend on the slow accumulation of actions over time. People who understand this principle are able to tolerate temporary discomfort because they remain focused on the larger trajectory of their lives. Flexibility also plays a role in long-term thinking. Planning for the future does not mean rigidly controlling every outcome. Circumstances change, opportunities shift, and new challenges appear unexpectedly. The goal is not to predict every detail, but to maintain a clear sense of direction. When your decisions are guided by long-term vision rather than momentary impulses, you can adapt to changing conditions without losing sight of your purpose. Ultimately, the law of short-sightedness reminds you that time is one of the most powerful forces shaping human life. Every action you take, no matter how small, moves your future in a particular direction. The immediate moment may feel dominant, but the quiet accumulation of decisions across months and years is what truly determines where you arrive. When you learn to see beyond the urgency of the present, you begin to operate with a different kind of intelligence, one that values patience over impulse, strategy over reaction, and long-term meaning over temporary reward. There is a moment that happens in almost every human interaction, though it often passes too quickly for people to notice. Someone says something, perhaps a suggestion, perhaps a criticism, perhaps just a different opinion, and suddenly something inside you tightens. Your posture shifts slightly. Your thoughts begin moving faster. Instead of listening carefully, your mind starts building a defense. You begin preparing explanations, justifications, or counter-arguments. Even before the other person has finished speaking, you are already protecting yourself. This reaction is so common that it feels almost automatic. It is the law of defensiveness at work. At its core, defensiveness is the ego's attempt to protect its sense of identity. Every person carries an internal image of themselves, an idea of who they are, what they are capable of, and how they should be perceived by others. This image forms gradually through years of experience. Praise, criticism, success, and failure. Over time, it becomes deeply attached to one's sense of self-worth. When something threatens this image, the mind reacts almost instantly. It interprets the situation not simply as information, but as a potential attack. And once the ego feels threatened, the priority shifts from understanding the truth to defending the self. This reaction often appears most clearly when people receive criticism. Even constructive feedback can trigger defensiveness because it suggests that something about our behavior, ideas, or abilities might be flawed. Instead of evaluating the information calmly, the mind rushes to protect its identity. People may deny the criticism entirely, rationalize their actions, or redirect blame towards someone else. Sometimes the reaction becomes emotional anger, irritation, or sarcasm appear almost immediately. To the person experiencing it, the response feels justified, but to an outside observer, it may appear disproportionate or unnecessary. Defensiveness does not only arise in response to criticism, it can also appear when people feel misunderstood, challenged, or compared unfavorably to others. A simple disagreement can trigger the same protective reaction. Instead of treating a conversation as an exchange of ideas, the mind treats it as a contest where one side must win. In these moments, the goal quietly changes. Rather than searching for clarity or mutual understanding, the ego focuses on preserving its position. One of the most important aspects of this law is that defensiveness often operates beneath conscious awareness. Few people wake up intending to be defensive. In fact, many individuals sincerely believe they are being rational and objective during an argument. Yet the emotional reaction occurs so quickly that the mind rarely questions it. This is why defensiveness can escalate conflict so easily. When two people both feel their identities are under threat, the conversation transforms into a cycle of reactions. Each response becomes more emotional, and the original issue becomes almost impossible to resolve. Recognizing the signs of defensiveness is therefore an essential skill. These signs can appear in subtle forms: a sudden change in tone, a shift in body language, or a quick interruption in conversation, may indicate that the ego has become alert. Some people respond by denying responsibility. Others respond with elaborate explanations meant to justify their behavior. Still others deflect attention by pointing out flaws in the other person. Although these reactions may appear different on the surface, they all serve the same purpose: protecting the self-image from perceived threat. Understanding defensiveness also changes how you interpret the behavior of others. When someone reacts strongly to feedback or disagreement, it is rarely because they consciously want to create conflict. More often, they feel that something important about their identity has been challenged. Their reaction is a form of emotional self-defense. Seeing this dynamic allows you to approach the situation with greater patience. Instead of responding with equal defensiveness, you can step back and recognize the underlying emotional trigger. Managing your own defensiveness begins with awareness. The moment you notice the emotional surge, perhaps a quick rise of irritation, or the urge to interrupt, that is the signal to pause. Instead of reacting immediately, allow yourself a moment of distance. Take a breath and observe the situation from a slightly wider perspective. Ask yourself whether the criticism or disagreement truly threatens your identity, or whether it might simply be information worth considering. This small pause often creates space for a more thoughtful response. Another useful approach is learning to separate behavior from identity. When feedback feels personal, defensiveness intensifies because the ego interprets it as an attack on who you are. But if you shift the focus towards specific actions or decisions, the conversation becomes less threatening. Instead of thinking, "They are criticizing me," you begin thinking, "They are discussing something I did." This subtle change reduces emotional tension and makes it easier to listen objectively. Empathy also plays a powerful role in reducing defensiveness. When you try to understand the perspective of the other person, your attention shifts away from protecting your ego and toward understanding the situation. Often the other person's intention is not to harm or belittle you, but to express their own concerns or observations. By acknowledging their perspective, even partially, you create an environment where dialogue can continue without escalating into conflict. Equally important is learning how to communicate criticism without triggering defensiveness in others. The way feedback is delivered often determines how it will be received. Harsh language, accusations, or confrontational tones naturally provoke defensive reactions. In contrast, framing feedback constructively, focusing on specific behaviors rather than personal judgments, reduces the sense of threat. When people feel respected and understood, they are far more likely to listen openly. Sometimes, however, the best response to defensiveness is patience. In emotionally charged moments, continuing the discussion may only intensify the reaction. Allowing time for emotions to settle can create a more productive opportunity for conversation later. This strategic pause does not mean avoiding the issue. It simply recognizes that clarity often requires emotional distance. The law of defensiveness ultimately reveals how fragile the human ego can be. Beneath the confidence people display in daily life lies a deep sensitivity to how they are perceived. This sensitivity shapes countless interactions, arguments between friends, disagreements at work, even debates about ideas. When the ego feels secure, communication flows easily, but when it feels threatened, the mind instinctively builds barriers. Mastering this law does not mean eliminating defensiveness entirely. The impulse to protect oneself is a natural part of being human. What matters is learning to recognize it before it controls your behavior. When you become aware of the ego's protective reflex, you gain the ability to respond differently. Instead of reacting automatically, you can choose curiosity over resistance, listening over argument, and understanding over pride. In that moment, the conversation transforms from a battlefield of egos into an opportunity for genuine insight. There is a quiet paradox that appears again and again in human life. Many people genuinely want success, stability, and happiness, yet somehow they repeatedly act in ways that move them further away from those very goals. They procrastinate when opportunity appears. They hesitate when a decision must be made. They abandon promising paths just as progress begins. When this pattern repeats often enough, it begins to feel confusing, even mysterious. Why would someone sabotage their own progress? Why would a person interfere with what they consciously want? The answer lies in a deeper psychological principle Robert Greene calls the law of self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is rarely intentional. Very few people wake up in the morning with the plan to ruin their own chances. Instead, these behaviors operate quietly beneath conscious awareness. They appear as habits, reactions, or emotional responses that feel natural in the moment. Only later, sometimes much later, does the individual realize that their actions have created unnecessary obstacles. What makes self-sabotage so powerful is that it disguises itself as ordinary behavior. Procrastination feels like temporary delay. Overthinking feels like caution. Perfectionism appears to be ambition. Yet behind these patterns often lies an unconscious fear that shapes decision-making more than we realize. Much of this fear originates in early experiences. As people grow up, they develop beliefs about themselves and their place in the world. Some individuals internalize the idea that they must prove their worth constantly. Others grow up with the quiet belief that success is dangerous, overwhelming, or undeserved. These beliefs may not exist as clear thoughts in the mind, but they influence emotional reactions in subtle ways. When opportunities appear that challenge those beliefs, the mind reacts defensively. Instead of moving forward confidently, it creates hesitation or distraction. The result is a pattern where the individual unconsciously prevents themselves from reaching the very outcomes they claim to desire. Consider the common habit of procrastination. On the surface, procrastination seems like simple laziness or poor time management, but in many cases, it reflects a deeper psychological tension. A person may delay starting an important project not because they lack ability, but because beginning the task introduces the possibility of failure. If they never fully commit, they never have to confront that possibility directly. The delay becomes a protective shield for the ego. Ironically, this protection creates the very outcome the person fears: incomplete work, missed opportunities, and disappointment. Indecision operates in a similar way. When someone faces a meaningful choice, the mind begins imagining multiple outcomes. If those outcomes include potential loss, embarrassment, or criticism, anxiety begins to rise. Instead of moving forward with imperfect certainty, the person remains suspended in endless analysis. They gather more information, consider more options, wait for the perfect moment that never arrives. The mind convinces itself that caution is wise, yet the deeper motivation is often fear disguised as prudence. Perfectionism is another powerful form of self-sabotage. Society often praises perfectionists for their high standards, but the emotional cost of this pattern can be enormous. When someone believes that every action must meet an impossible standard, progress becomes slow and exhausting. Projects remain unfinished because they never feel good enough. Opportunities are avoided because the outcome cannot be controlled completely. Over time, the pursuit of perfection transforms into a subtle barrier that prevents growth. Instead of building confidence through action, the individual becomes trapped in endless preparation. Negative self-talk also plays a central role in self-sabotaging patterns. The internal voice that constantly questions ability or predicts failure can gradually shape behavior. If someone repeatedly tells themselves they are not capable, they begin to act in ways that confirm that belief. They may avoid challenges, hesitate to take risks, or withdraw when situations demand initiative. The mind then interprets these outcomes as evidence that the original belief was correct, reinforcing the cycle. What makes these patterns particularly difficult to overcome is that they operate automatically. They feel like part of one's personality rather than learned behaviors that can be changed. But once the pattern becomes visible, its power begins to weaken. Self-awareness acts like light entering a dark room. When you begin to notice how certain habits repeatedly appear at crucial moments, you can start questioning their origin. The first step in breaking self-sabotaging cycles is honest reflection. Look at your past experiences and ask whether similar obstacles appear repeatedly. Do you consistently delay important work until pressure becomes overwhelming? Do you abandon goals just as they begin gaining momentum? Do you talk yourself out of opportunities before fully exploring them? Patterns like these often reveal the presence of unconscious fears. Once these fears are identified, it becomes possible to challenge them. Many self-sabotaging beliefs originate from experiences that occurred years earlier under very different circumstances. A moment of criticism in childhood, a painful failure, or a period of rejection may have created conclusions about personal ability or worth. Yet those conclusions often persist long after the original situation has passed. Recognizing this allows you to separate the past from the present. The beliefs that once shaped your behavior may no longer reflect your actual potential. Developing self-compassion is also crucial in this process. People who struggle with self-sabotage often judge themselves harshly, interpreting every mistake as proof of inadequacy. This harsh inner environment increases anxiety and makes avoidance behaviors more likely. By replacing constant self-criticism with a more balanced perspective, you create the emotional safety needed to take risks and learn from mistakes. Another effective strategy involves breaking large goals into smaller steps. When a task appears overwhelming, the mind reacts with resistance. But when progress is divided into manageable actions, the emotional barrier becomes less intimidating. Each small accomplishment builds momentum and gradually replaces the old pattern of avoidance. Support from others can also accelerate change. Honest feedback from mentors, colleagues, or trusted friends can reveal blind spots that are difficult to see alone. When people around you encourage growth and accountability, it becomes easier to stay aligned with your goals. Ultimately, the law of self-sabotage teaches that success is not determined solely by talent or opportunity. Often, the greatest obstacles exist within the mind itself. Hidden fears, old beliefs, and unconscious habits can quietly shape behavior in ways that undermine progress. But once these patterns are recognized, they no longer control the direction of your life automatically. The more clearly you understand these internal dynamics, the more freedom you gain. Instead of repeating the same cycles unconsciously, you begin making choices with greater awareness. You learn to recognize fear without allowing it to dictate your actions. And over time, the habits that once held you back become opportunities for growth, resilience, and deeper self-understanding. There is a strange thing about human emotions. The feelings you refuse to face do not disappear. They do not fade quietly into nothing. Instead, they slip beneath the surface of your awareness and continue influencing your behavior in ways you may never consciously notice. You might believe you have moved on from a painful experience, or that you have successfully buried anger, fear, or disappointment, but the mind rarely erases what it cannot accept. It hides it, and what is hidden often becomes more powerful than what is seen. This is the essence of what Robert Greene describes as the law of repression. Repression is a psychological defense mechanism. When certain emotions or desires feel too uncomfortable, threatening, or socially unacceptable, the mind pushes them out of conscious awareness. The process is subtle and usually happens early in life. As children grow, they quickly learn which emotions receive approval and which ones do not. Expressions of anger may be punished. Vulnerability may be discouraged. Curiosity about certain topics may be met with embarrassment or silence. In order to adapt to these expectations, the mind begins filtering its emotional expression. Some feelings are allowed to surface freely, while others are pushed aside. At first, repression seems useful. It allows individuals to function in social environments where complete emotional transparency would create conflict or instability. Imagine expressing every impulse or frustration exactly as it appears. Social life would become chaotic. The ability to control emotional expression helps maintain relationships and order, but repression becomes problematic when emotions are not simply managed, but completely denied. When feelings are repeatedly pushed away instead of understood, they accumulate beneath the surface like pressure building inside a sealed container. Over time, these suppressed emotions begin to influence behavior indirectly. Anxiety, for example, often emerges from feelings that were never acknowledged. A person may experience constant tension without understanding its origin. Irritability and sudden bursts of anger can also signal repressed frustration. The mind may react strongly to minor situations because deeper emotions are searching for an outlet. Even patterns of self-sabotage can be connected to unresolved internal conflicts that were never brought into conscious awareness. Another common manifestation of repression is projection. When certain emotions feel unacceptable within ourselves, the mind sometimes attributes those feelings to others instead. Someone who represses their own hostility may become convinced that others are constantly criticizing or attacking them. A person who suppresses feelings of envy might interpret others' success as arrogance or manipulation. By projecting the emotion outward, the mind avoids confronting the uncomfortable truth that the feeling originated internally. Physical symptoms can also arise from prolonged repression. The body and mind are deeply connected, and emotional tension often finds expression through physical discomfort, chronic stress, headaches, fatigue, and other unexplained symptoms can sometimes reflect emotions that remain unacknowledged. While these experiences are complex and influenced by many factors, the connection between emotional suppression and physical strain is well documented. Repression can also distort relationships. When emotions remain hidden, communication becomes incomplete. A person may behave in ways that seem confusing or contradictory to others. They may withdraw without explanation, react strongly to harmless comments, or struggle to express affection or vulnerability. The underlying emotions remain invisible, yet they quietly shape every interaction. Without awareness, both the individual and the people around them may feel frustrated by behaviors that appear unpredictable. Understanding the law of repression begins with recognizing that emotional avoidance does not create emotional resolution. Ignoring a feeling does not eliminate it, it simply pushes it into a different part of the mind. Over time, the suppressed emotion continues, influencing perception and behavior in indirect ways. The mind may construct elaborate rational explanations for reactions that are actually rooted in older, unprocessed experiences. The first step toward breaking this cycle is self-awareness. This requires the willingness to observe your emotional responses honestly. When strong reactions arise, anger, jealousy, anxiety, sadness, it is useful to pause and examine them rather than dismissing them immediately. Ask yourself where the emotion might originate. Is it connected to the current situation alone, or does it echo something deeper from the past? These questions can gradually reveal patterns that were previously invisible. Reflection is an important tool in this process. Writing, meditation, or quiet contemplation can help uncover emotions that normally remain hidden beneath daily activity. When the mind slows down, thoughts and feelings that were previously suppressed often begin to surface. This can feel uncomfortable at first, but it is also the beginning of emotional clarity. Once an emotion becomes visible, it can be understood and integrated rather than continuing to operate unconsciously. Healthy expression also plays a vital role in managing repression. Emotions do not disappear simply because they are acknowledged. They must also be expressed in constructive ways. Some people find relief through conversation with trusted friends or mentors. Others use creative outlets such as writing, art, or music to explore their internal experiences. Physical activity can also release emotional tension that has accumulated in the body. The specific method matters less than the willingness to allow emotions to move rather than remain trapped. Empathy toward yourself is equally important during this process. Many suppressed emotions originate from experiences where vulnerability felt unsafe. When these feelings begin to reappear, it is easy to judge them harshly or attempt to push them away again. But genuine self-understanding requires patience. Emotions that have been hidden for years may take time to process fully. Ultimately, the law of repression reveals that the human mind is far more complex than it appears on the surface. Beneath the thoughts and actions that people consciously recognize lies a deeper emotional landscape shaped by past experiences and unspoken feelings. When these emotions remain suppressed, they influence behavior quietly and unpredictably, but when they are brought into awareness and understood, their power changes. Instead of controlling your reactions from the shadows, these emotions become part of a larger understanding of who you are. The more honestly you explore your internal world, the less your behavior is dictated by hidden forces. In that awareness, you gain a clearer sense of your motivations, your relationships, and the emotional currents that move through your life. There is an emotion that almost everyone experiences: yet very few people are willing to admit openly. It appears quietly, often disguised as criticism, discomfort, or indifference. You might feel it when someone close to you achieves something impressive. A colleague receives recognition. A friend seems to advance faster in life. At first, you may congratulate them sincerely, but somewhere in the background of your mind another feeling emerges, a subtle tension, a sense that their success somehow highlights something missing in your own life. That quiet discomfort is the beginning of envy, one of the most powerful and hidden forces shaping human behavior. Envy is different from simple admiration. When you admire someone, their success inspires you. It makes you curious about how they achieved it and encourages you to improve yourself. Envy, however, carries a darker emotional tone. Instead of feeling inspired, you feel diminished. The other person's achievement seems to create a gap between you and them, and that gap feels uncomfortable. The mind begins searching for ways to reduce this discomfort. Sometimes it does so by downplaying the other person's success. Other times it attempts to compete, criticize, or subtly undermine them. In its most destructive form, envy transforms another person's progress into a personal threat. One reason envy is so powerful is that it thrives in comparison. Human beings naturally measure themselves against those around them. Throughout history, this comparison served practical purposes, evaluating status, resources, and social position within a group. But in modern life, the opportunities for comparison have expanded dramatically. Every day, people encounter images of others' achievements, lifestyles, and accomplishments through conversations, media, and social networks. Individuals are constantly exposed to examples of success that may appear effortless or glamorous. These comparisons can quietly amplify feelings of inadequacy. What makes envy particularly dangerous is that it rarely appears as pure jealousy. Most people do not consciously say to themselves, "I envy this person." Instead, the emotion disguises itself through rationalizations. Someone might claim that another person's success was undeserved or based on luck. They may search for flaws in the person they envy, highlighting their mistakes or weaknesses. Gossip often becomes an indirect outlet for envy, allowing individuals to reduce the perceived status of others without openly admitting their own feelings. In this way, envy spreads quietly through conversations and social dynamics, influencing relationships in ways that are not always obvious. Envy also has a corrosive effect on personal happiness. When someone constantly measures their life against the achievements of others, satisfaction becomes difficult to maintain. Even meaningful accomplishments may feel inadequate if someone else appears to have more. Instead of appreciating their own progress, the individual remains focused on what they lack. This creates a persistent sense of dissatisfaction, where success is never quite enough because the comparison never ends. Relationships often suffer under the influence of envy as well. Friendships, professional partnerships, and family connections can become strained when one person's success triggers insecurity in another. What once felt like mutual support may transform into subtle competition. Compliments become hesitant. Genuine excitement is replaced by forced politeness. Over time, the emotional distance grows, even if neither person openly acknowledges the underlying cause. Yet envy is not always destructive by nature. In fact, the emotion itself contains valuable information. Envy reveals what a person secretly desires. When you feel a strong reaction to someone else's success, it often points towards something meaningful that you wish to develop in your own life. The problem arises when envy remains unconscious and unmanaged. Instead of using the feeling as a guide, the mind reacts defensively and directs its energy toward resentment rather than growth. Recognizing envy within yourself requires honesty. The emotion is uncomfortable precisely because it challenges your sense of self. Admitting envy can feel like admitting weakness, but awareness transforms the emotion into something more constructive. When you acknowledge that someone's success triggers envy, you can begin asking deeper questions. What exactly about their achievement affects you? Is it the recognition they receive, the freedom their career provides, or the confidence they seem to possess? By identifying the source of the feeling, you convert envy into insight. Gratitude is another powerful antidote to the destructive side of envy. When the mind focuses exclusively on what others have, it easily overlooks the resources and progress already present in one's own life. Gratitude shifts attention back toward personal growth and appreciation. It reminds you that every individual follows a unique path shaped by different circumstances, opportunities, and challenges. Empathy also helps soften envy. When you look beyond surface appearances, you often discover that success carries its own complexities. The person you envy may have endured years of struggle, uncertainty, or sacrifice to reach their position. They may face pressures or responsibilities that are not immediately visible. Understanding these hidden aspects of another person's journey transforms them from a symbol of comparison into a human being with their own story. Perhaps the most important lesson of the law of envy is that the emotion cannot be eliminated completely. As long as people live in social environments, comparison will remain part of human psychology. The goal is not to pretend envy does not exist, but to recognize it before it shapes behavior unconsciously. When envy is ignored, it can quietly influence attitudes, relationships, and decisions, but when it is acknowledged, it becomes a signal pointing toward areas where personal growth might occur. Ultimately, the energy behind envy can be redirected. Instead of allowing resentment to take control, you can transform the feeling into motivation. The success of others can serve as evidence of what is possible rather than as a reminder of what is lacking. This shift requires practice, because the instinct to compare runs deep within the human mind. But each time you replace resentment with curiosity or inspiration, the emotion loses some of its destructive power. The law of envy reminds you that human nature is complex and often contradictory. People are capable of admiration and resentment at the same time. They celebrate others while quietly comparing themselves. By understanding this dynamic, you become less likely to be controlled by it. Instead of allowing comparison to create bitterness, you can use it as a mirror, one that reveals your deeper aspirations while still allowing you to appreciate the journey of others. There is a subtle illusion that the human mind creates almost automatically. It whispers quietly but persistently, "You are more important than you think." It tells you that your ideas are sharper, your intentions purer, your abilities greater than most people around you. At first, this voice may appear harmless, even motivating. After all, confidence is often praised as a virtue, but when confidence slowly transforms into exaggerated self-importance, it creates a dangerous distortion of reality. This distortion is what Robert Greene calls the law of grandiosity. Grandiosity is the tendency to see oneself as larger, more capable, or more significant than reality justifies. It is not simply pride or ambition. Those qualities can be healthy when balanced with self-awareness. Grandiosity goes further. It inflates the image you have of yourself until it no longer matches the world around you. In that inflated mental landscape, criticism becomes an insult, advice becomes an annoyance, and opposing viewpoints appear ignorant or irrelevant. The person trapped in grandiosity begins to live inside a private narrative where they are the central hero, misunderstood by others and destined for exceptional recognition. The roots of this tendency often lie deeper than people realize. In some cases, grandiosity grows out of excessive praise during childhood. When a person is constantly told that they are extraordinary, unique, or superior without developing resilience and humility, they may build an identity that depends on maintaining that image. In other cases, grandiosity arises as a defense mechanism. Someone who secretly struggles with feelings of insecurity or inadequacy may compensate by exaggerating their importance. By constructing a grand image of themselves, they shield their ego from confronting uncomfortable doubts, regardless of its origin. Grandiosity has predictable effects on behavior. The individual begins overestimating their abilities and underestimating potential risks. They become more likely to make bold decisions without carefully evaluating consequences. Because their internal narrative presents them as exceptional, they assume that rules or limitations that apply to others will not apply to them. This overconfidence can initially appear impressive. People who project certainty often attract attention and influence. Yet over time, the gap between perception and reality begins to widen. One of the most common signs of grandiosity is the inability to accept criticism. When feedback challenges the inflated self-image, the mind reacts defensively. Instead of examining the information objectively, the person dismisses it, attacks the source, or reinterprets the criticism as jealousy or hostility. This reaction prevents learning. Without the ability to absorb correction, mistakes repeat themselves. Gradually, the individual becomes isolated within their own perspective, surrounded only by voices that confirm their beliefs. Another characteristic of grandiosity is the need for constant admiration. The inflated self-image must be reinforced regularly to remain convincing. Compliments and recognition provide temporary validation, but the satisfaction rarely lasts long. Soon, the person seeks more attention, more praise, more visible proof of their importance. This endless search for admiration can strain relationships, because people around them begin to feel that their role is simply to provide affirmation rather than genuine connection. Grandiosity also distorts perception of others. When someone sees themselves as superior, empathy becomes difficult. The struggles and perspectives of others appear less significant compared to their own ambitions. Conversations become one-sided. Decisions may prioritize personal glory rather than collective well-being. In leadership roles, this mindset can lead to catastrophic outcomes because the leader stops listening to warnings or alternative viewpoints. History provides many examples of how grandiosity can lead to downfall. Leaders who achieved early success sometimes began believing their intuition was infallible. As their confidence expanded, they ignored caution and surrounded themselves with advisors who reinforced their vision rather than challenged it. For a time, their boldness might appear visionary, but eventually reality intervenes. When decisions are based on illusion rather than careful judgment, the consequences accumulate. Yet the law of grandiosity does not suggest that ambition itself is dangerous. Ambition is often the engine of progress. The key difference lies in the relationship between ambition and reality. Healthy ambition remains grounded in observation and feedback. It recognizes limitations while striving to overcome them. Grandiosity, by contrast, rejects limitations entirely. It replaces careful evaluation with certainty and substitutes self-image for evidence. Developing awareness of this tendency begins with honest self-reflection. Everyone experiences moments of inflated confidence. After success or praise, it is natural to feel powerful and capable. The danger appears when those feelings harden into fixed beliefs about one's superiority. Asking simple questions can help maintain perspective. Am I listening to feedback carefully, or dismissing it too quickly? Am I evaluating risks realistically, or assuming that things will work out because of my abilities? These questions interrupt the illusion before it grows stronger. Humility serves as one of the most effective antidotes to grandiosity. Humility does not mean underestimating your talents or pretending to be less capable than you are. Instead, it means recognizing that every individual operates within a complex world full of uncertainty. No matter how experienced or intelligent someone becomes, there will always be aspects of reality they do not fully understand. Accepting this fact keeps the mind open to learning. Surrounding yourself with people who speak honestly rather than flatter excessively also helps maintain balance. Genuine advisors provide perspectives that challenge your assumptions. While their feedback may feel uncomfortable at times, it prevents the mind from drifting too far into illusion. Constructive disagreement becomes a safeguard against self-deception. Continuous learning plays a similar role. When you approach life with the attitude that there is always more to discover, your sense of identity becomes less dependent on appearing superior. Instead of defending a fixed image, you focus on growth. Curiosity replaces arrogance, and progress becomes more sustainable. The law of grandiosity ultimately reminds you that the human mind is capable of creating powerful illusions about itself. These illusions can feel exhilarating in the moment, but they carry hidden dangers. The greater the gap between perception and reality, the more unstable success becomes. By cultivating humility, curiosity, and openness to feedback, you keep your ambitions grounded in reality. True strength does not come from believing you are above others. It comes from understanding both your abilities and your limitations with clarity. When confidence remains connected to reality rather than inflated imagination, It becomes a steady force guiding thoughtful action instead of a fragile illusion waiting to collapse. From the moment you enter the world, invisible expectations begin shaping how you see yourself. Long before you understand language fully, subtle signals start teaching you what it means to be a man or a woman. These signals appear in the stories people tell, the behaviors they reward, and the roles they assume you will naturally adopt. Over time, these expectations form powerful patterns in the mind. You begin to believe that certain traits belong to one gender while others belong to the other. Strength, independence, and ambition may be encouraged in one direction, while sensitivity, patience, and emotional awareness are expected in another. What begins as social guidance gradually becomes something deeper, an internal limit on who you believe you are allowed to be. This is the foundation of what Robert Greene calls the law of gender rigidity. Gender rigidity refers to the tendency of societies and individuals to restrict behavior according to narrow definitions of masculinity and femininity. These definitions are often treated as natural or inevitable, but in reality they are shaped by cultural traditions that evolve over time. Every society creates its own expectations about how men and women should think, feel, and behave. Some of these expectations may serve practical purposes within a particular historical moment, yet when they become rigid rules rather than flexible guidelines, they begin limiting human potential. You can see the effects of gender rigidity in countless everyday situations. A boy who expresses vulnerability may be told to be strong or stop being emotional, subtly teaching him that certain feelings are unacceptable. A girl who displays assertiveness or ambition may receive criticism for being too aggressive or too dominant. Over time, these messages shape behavior. Individuals begin suppressing parts of themselves that do not align with the role assigned to them. Instead of developing their full range of abilities, they narrow their identity to fit expectations. The problem with rigid roles is that they divide human qualities into artificial categories. In reality, traits like courage, empathy, creativity, and discipline are not inherently masculine or feminine. They are human capacities that exist within everyone to varying degrees. When society assigns these qualities exclusively to one gender, it forces individuals to abandon parts of their psychological potential. The result is imbalance. Men may struggle to express emotion or vulnerability, while women may feel discouraged from pursuing leadership or independence. Both sides lose something essential. Robert Greene emphasizes that human psychology naturally contains both masculine and feminine elements. These concepts do not refer strictly to biological sex, but to complementary modes of thinking and behaving. Traditionally, masculine energy often emphasizes action, direction, and decisiveness. Traditionally, feminine energy tends to emphasize intuition, connection, and emotional awareness. When individuals develop only one side of this spectrum, their perception of the world becomes limited. True psychological strength emerges when both energies coexist and interact. History offers many examples of individuals who transcended rigid gender expectations and achieved remarkable influence. Figures such as Queen Elizabeth I demonstrated extraordinary political authority in a time when leadership was considered almost exclusively masculine. At the same time, leaders like Abraham Lincoln were known for profound empathy and emotional sensitivity, qualities not traditionally associated with male power in their era. These individuals succeeded not because they conformed perfectly to social expectations, but because they integrated qualities from both sides of the psychological spectrum. Gender rigidity also influences relationships. When individuals believe they must perform a specific role, communication can become restricted. For instance, if one partner assumes they must always appear strong and unemotional, genuine vulnerability becomes difficult to express. If another partner believes they must always be accommodating or nurturing, they may suppress their own ambitions or frustrations. Over time, these rigid roles create misunderstandings and emotional distance. Relationships thrive when both individuals are free to express the full range of their personalities rather than acting according to predetermined scripts. Breaking the limits of gender rigidity begins with awareness. Many of the expectations people carry are so deeply embedded that they feel natural. Questioning them requires conscious reflection. Ask yourself whether certain behaviors you avoid are truly incompatible with who you are, or whether they simply conflict with social expectations you learned long ago. Often the boundaries you assume are internal constructs rather than real limitations. Expanding your psychological range also requires experimentation. Try developing qualities that may feel unfamiliar at first. If you are accustomed to solving problems through force and logic alone, explore the value of listening and emotional understanding. If you tend to rely primarily on empathy and cooperation, experiment with assertiveness and decisive action. Each experience broadens your perception of what is possible within your own personality. Empathy toward others also plays an important role in dissolving gender rigidity. When you encounter people who behave differently from traditional expectations, it is easy to react with judgment or confusion. But recognizing that every individual contains a complex blend of qualities allows you to see these differences as expressions of human diversity rather than violations of social norms. This perspective fosters deeper respect and understanding across cultures and relationships. Education and dialogue further contribute to this shift. Conversations about gender roles often provoke strong emotions because they challenge deeply rooted beliefs. Yet open discussion allows societies to evolve. As people examine the origins of these expectations, they can begin distinguishing between traditions that support well-being and those that unnecessarily restrict personal growth. Ultimately, the law of gender rigidity reminds you that identity should not be confined by outdated definitions. The human mind contains a vast range of capacities waiting to be explored. Courage does not belong to one gender, and compassion does not belong to another. Intelligence, leadership, creativity, and emotional depth exist within everyone. When individuals allow themselves to develop this full spectrum, they become more adaptable, more empathetic, and more capable of navigating the complexity of modern life. Breaking free from rigid roles does not mean rejecting tradition entirely. It means recognizing that tradition should serve human development rather than limit it. When you allow yourself to integrate both strength and sensitivity, logic and intuition, independence and connection, you begin operating with a more complete understanding of yourself. And in that integration lies a deeper form of freedom, the freedom to become fully human rather than merely fulfilling a role assigned long before you had the chance to choose it. Look carefully at the rhythm of most people's lives and you will notice something unsettling. Days pass, weeks turn into months, and years quietly accumulate, yet very little seems to move with intention. People wake up, respond to obligations, react to circumstances, and then repeat the same cycle again the next day. On the surface, everything appears normal. Work is completed, responsibilities are handled, routine continue. But beneath this steady motion there is often a deeper absence, direction. This is the essence of what Robert Greene describes as the law of aimlessness. Aimlessness is not simply laziness or inactivity. In fact, many people who live without direction are extremely busy. Their schedules are full, their energy constantly spent on tasks and obligations, yet busyness can easily disguise the absence of purpose. When your actions are guided only by immediate demands, emails, deadlines, expectations from others, you may appear productive while gradually drifting away from any meaningful destination. Life becomes reactive rather than intentional. Human beings have a natural need for direction. When you know what you are moving toward, even difficult work gains meaning. Obstacles become challenges to overcome rather than signs of failure. But when direction is missing, even comfortable circumstances can feel strangely empty without a guiding aim. The mind struggles to organize its energy. Motivation becomes inconsistent. Small frustrations feel larger than they should because there is no larger context giving them purpose. Aimlessness often develops gradually. In childhood and early adulthood, many decisions are shaped by external influences, family expectations, educational systems, cultural standards of success. These influences can provide structure, but they may also distract individuals from discovering their own genuine interests. Someone might pursue a career because it appears stable or prestigious, rather than because it resonates with their deeper curiosity. Over time, they may realize that the path they followed does not truly belong to them, yet changing direction feels risky. so they continue moving forward without clarity. Another source of aimlessness is the overwhelming number of possibilities available in modern life. Previous generations often faced limited choices regarding career, location, and lifestyle. Today, the range of options can feel almost infinite. While this freedom offers opportunities, it can also create paralysis. When every path appears possible, deciding on one direction becomes more difficult. Some individuals respond by postponing commitment indefinitely. They drift between interests and opportunities without fully investing in any of them. Technology and constant stimulation can intensify this problem. Digital environments are designed to capture attention continuously, offering a steady stream of entertainment, information, and distraction. While these experiences can be enjoyable, they also fragment concentration. When attention is constantly pulled in multiple directions, it becomes harder to reflect deeply on what truly matters. The mind remains occupied with immediate stimuli instead of exploring long-term meaning. The consequences of aimlessness rarely appear suddenly. Instead, they accumulate quietly over time. Without a clear sense of direction, people may begin feeling restless or dissatisfied, even when their lives appear stable from the outside. Work becomes mechanical rather than engaging. Achievements feel hollow because they were never connected to a deeper purpose. Relationships may also suffer, because individuals who lack direction often struggle to bring clarity and enthusiasm into their interactions with others. History shows that individuals who achieve lasting influence almost always possess a strong sense of purpose. This purpose does not necessarily appear early in life or emerge perfectly formed. In many cases, it develops gradually through experimentation and reflection. What distinguishes these individuals is their willingness to explore their interests deeply and commit to a direction once it becomes clear. They treat their life as a project unfolding over time rather than as a sequence of disconnected events. Developing purpose begins with self-observation. Instead of asking abstract questions about what you should do, examine the activities that naturally capture your attention. Notice what subjects or problems consistently spark curiosity. These moments often reveal clues about your deeper inclinations. When you pursue areas that genuinely interest you, learning becomes easier and effort feels more meaningful. Another important step is accepting that purpose rarely appears without action. Many people wait for a sudden revelation that will reveal their ideal path. In reality, direction usually emerges through experimentation, trying different projects, developing new skills, and engaging with diverse experiences gradually clarify what resonates and what does not. Each experience becomes a piece of information guiding future choices. Commitment also plays a crucial role. Once you identify a direction that feels meaningful, progress requires sustained effort. Modern culture often celebrates quick results, but most meaningful achievements unfold slowly. Mastery of any field demands patience and consistent practice. Without commitment, even the most promising interest remains superficial. With commitment, ordinary activities can transform into a long-term journey of growth. Equally important is the ability to adjust direction without abandoning purpose entirely. Life inevitably presents unexpected changes. Opportunities appear, circumstances shift, and priorities evolve. Having purpose does not mean rigidly following a predetermined path regardless of reality. Instead, it means maintaining a clear sense of direction while adapting your approach as new information emerges. Relationships and community can also strengthen a sense of purpose. When your efforts contribute to something larger than personal gain, whether through creative work, service, or collaboration, they acquire additional meaning. Human beings are naturally motivated when they feel their actions matter within a broader context. Ultimately, the law of aimlessness reminds you that time is the most valuable resource in life. Each day that passes becomes part of a larger story, whether you guide it consciously or not. Without direction, years can disappear into routine and distraction. But when you cultivate a clear aim, even ordinary moments become steps towards something meaningful. Purpose does not guarantee a life free from difficulty. Challenges and uncertainty remain inevitable. Yet direction transforms the experience of those challenges. Instead of wandering through circumstances without understanding where they lead, you move forward with intention. Your actions begin forming a coherent path rather than a scattered collection of reactions. And over time, that path becomes the foundation of a life shaped not by drift, but by deliberate choice. Take a moment and think about how many of your beliefs truly belong to you. Not the opinions you repeat automatically, not the ideas you absorbed from school, family, or the culture around you, but the ones you have examined deeply and chosen consciously. If you are honest, you may realize that a surprising number of your thoughts, preferences, and reactions have been shaped by something far more powerful than personal reasoning. They have been shaped by the invisible influence of the group. This quiet but immense force is what Robert Greene describes as the law of conformity. Human beings are social creatures. Long before modern society existed, survival depended on belonging to a group. In ancient environments, being isolated from the tribe often meant danger or death. As a result, the human brain evolved to value acceptance and belonging very strongly. Deep within the mind, there exists a powerful instinct to align with the group around us. When others approve of our behavior, we feel secure. When we sense rejection or disapproval, discomfort appears almost immediately. This instinct once helped protect us, but in modern life it can quietly shape our beliefs and actions in ways we rarely notice. Conformity does not always appear as obvious obedience. Most of the time it works in subtle ways. Imagine entering a room where everyone expresses the same opinion about a topic. Even if you privately disagree, you may feel hesitation before speaking. The discomfort of standing alone against the group can be surprisingly strong. Many people soften their views, remain silent, or gradually adjust their beliefs to match the majority. They may later convince themselves that they changed their mind logically, but often the deeper reason was the desire to avoid isolation. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon for decades. One of the most famous demonstrations came from experiments conducted by Solomon Asch in the 1950s. Participants were asked to perform a simple visual task, identifying which line on a card matched the length of another line. The correct answer was obvious. Yet when actors in the room deliberately gave the wrong answer, many participants followed the group rather than trusting their own perception. Even when their eyes told them one thing, the pressure of the majority led them to doubt themselves. These experiments revealed something unsettling about human nature. The desire to belong can override direct evidence from our senses. Conformity influences not only simple judgments but also values, lifestyles, and worldviews. People often adopt political beliefs, cultural habits, and career expectations largely because those ideas dominate their environment. Within families, social circles, workplaces, and online communities, certain viewpoints become the norm. Once an idea is widely accepted within a group, questioning it can feel uncomfortable or even risky. Over time, individuals may internalize these beliefs so deeply that they forget they were once external influences. The power of conformity also explains why social trends spread rapidly. When enough people begin adopting a particular behavior or opinion, others follow almost automatically. Fashion, technology, cultural attitudes, and even moral judgments can shift dramatically when group influence reaches a tipping point. Individuals rarely analyze each change carefully. They simply sense that the group has moved in a new direction and adjust themselves accordingly. While conformity helps maintain social harmony, it also carries significant dangers. When group pressure becomes too strong, independent thinking weakens. People may suppress doubts or ignore warning signs in order to maintain unity with those around them. History offers many examples where conformity allowed harmful decisions to spread unchallenged. In political movements, corporate cultures, or social conflicts, individuals sometimes participate in actions they privately question simply because everyone else appears to support them. The psychological mechanism behind this behavior is often called groupthink. When a group becomes highly cohesive, members begin prioritizing agreement over critical evaluation. Dissenting voices feel discouraged, and alternative perspectives receive little attention. At first, this atmosphere may create a sense of confidence and unity, but without critical reflection, the group gradually loses its ability to evaluate reality accurately. Decisions become guided by collective enthusiasm rather than careful reasoning. Conformity also shapes everyday choices in less dramatic ways. Career paths, educational goals, and lifestyle preferences often reflect social expectations more than personal curiosity. Someone may pursue a profession because it is considered respectable rather than because it genuinely interests them. Others may adopt habits simply because they are common within their social environment. These choices can gradually distance individuals from their authentic interests, creating a quiet tension between who they are and who they feel expected to be. Understanding the law of conformity begins with recognizing how deeply the need for belonging influences perception. When you become aware of this instinct, you can begin questioning whether certain beliefs truly reflect your own reasoning. This does not mean rejecting every social influence. Communities provide valuable knowledge and support, but awareness allows you to distinguish between ideas you accept consciously and those you absorb automatically. One way to strengthen independence is to expose yourself to diverse perspectives. When you encounter different viewpoints, the illusion that your group's opinion represents absolute truth begins to weaken. Dialogue with people who think differently encourages critical thinking and intellectual flexibility. It reminds you that reality is often more complex than any single group's interpretation. Developing the courage to stand apart when necessary is another important skill. This does not require constant disagreement or rebellion. Instead, it involves maintaining loyalty to your observations and values, even when they differ from the majority. Speaking honestly in such moments may feel uncomfortable, but it also preserves intellectual integrity. Reflection and solitude can also counterbalance the influence of group pressure. When you step away from constant social feedback, you create space to evaluate your beliefs more clearly. In quiet moments of reflection, you can examine whether your actions align with your deeper principles or merely follow external expectations. Ultimately, the law of conformity reminds you that human beings constantly navigate the tension between belonging and independence. The desire to connect with others is natural and essential, yet when this desire becomes too dominant, it can overshadow personal judgment. By cultivating awareness, curiosity, and courage, you can remain connected to others without surrendering your capacity to think for yourself. In the end, true individuality does not require rejecting the group entirely. It means participating in community while still maintaining the freedom to question, reflect, and choose consciously. When you achieve this balance, your beliefs and actions begin to reflect both social connection and personal authenticity rather than the invisible pressure of conformity alone. If you observe human relationships long enough, you will eventually notice a pattern that can feel both surprising and unsettling. People who appear deeply loyal today may become distant tomorrow. Allies can turn into critics. Support that once felt unconditional may slowly fade when circumstances change. At first, this behavior can seem confusing, even unfair. After all, loyalty is often praised as one of the highest virtues. We expect friends, partners, colleagues, and leaders to remain consistent in their support. Yet reality rarely follows this ideal. Human loyalty is far more fragile and conditional than most people like to admit. This is what Robert Greene describes as the law of fickleness. Fickleness refers to the unstable nature of human commitment. It reflects the tendency for people's attitudes, loyalties, and allegiances to shift over time as emotions, interests, and circumstances evolve. While individuals may sincerely believe in their commitments at one moment, those commitments can weaken when new incentives, pressures, or opportunities appear. Understanding this aspect of human nature does not mean becoming cynical about all relationships. Instead, it means recognizing that loyalty is rarely fixed. It is constantly influenced by changing conditions. At the psychological level, fickleness arises from the way human emotions operate. People often make promises or express strong commitments while experiencing powerful feelings, enthusiasm, admiration, excitement, or gratitude. In those moments, their sincerity is genuine. They truly believe their support will remain constant. But emotions are not permanent states. As circumstances shift and feelings cool, the intensity that once sustained the commitment gradually fades. Without that emotional energy, loyalty may weaken. Another factor contributing to fickleness is self-interest. Most individuals, whether consciously or not, Evaluate situations according to how those situations affect their own well-being. When loyalty aligns with personal benefit, maintaining commitment feels natural, but when circumstances change and the same commitment begins to conflict with personal advantage, people may reconsider their position. This shift does not always happen with deliberate calculation. Often it occurs gradually as individuals reinterpret events in ways that justify their changing attitudes. Social influence also plays an important role. People rarely make decisions in isolation. They observe how others behave and adjust their responses accordingly. If a person notices that support within a group is beginning to decline, they may unconsciously align themselves with the emerging trend. No one wants to be the last person defending a position that others have abandoned. In this way, loyalty can dissolve collectively, each individual subtly following the movement of the group. History offers countless examples of how fickleness shapes political and social dynamics. Leaders who once enjoyed widespread admiration may suddenly face criticism when circumstances shift. Advisors who praised a ruler's decisions may quietly distance themselves after a setback. Public opinion can turn dramatically when new narratives appear. These changes often seem sudden from the outside, but they usually reflect a gradual erosion of loyalty that has been building beneath the surface. In personal relationships, the same principle appears in quieter forms. Friendships sometimes fade when shared interests or environments change. Professional alliances may weaken as individuals pursue different opportunities. Even long-standing partnerships can experience tension when one person's priorities evolve while the other remains focused on the past. These changes do not necessarily indicate betrayal or malice. They often reflect the natural evolution of individual motivations. Understanding the law of fickleness requires accepting that human beings are complex and adaptable. Loyalty is influenced not only by moral principles but also by emotional states, social dynamics, and practical considerations. Expecting unwavering devotion from others may lead to disappointment because it ignores these realities. Instead of assuming loyalty is permanent, it is more realistic to view it as something that must be continually reinforced through trust, fairness, and shared purpose. One important strategy for navigating this dynamic is observing behavior more carefully than words. People frequently express loyalty through promises and declarations, especially during moments of enthusiasm. While these expressions may be sincere, they do not always predict future actions. Actions reveal commitment more clearly than statements. When someone consistently supports you through challenges as well as successes, their loyalty carries greater weight than verbal assurances alone. It is also wise to recognize how circumstances influence relationships. When individuals feel respected, valued, and aligned with a shared goal, loyalty tends to strengthen. But when they feel neglected, threatened, or excluded, their attachment may weaken. Leaders who understand this principle pay close attention to the emotional and practical needs of those around them. By maintaining open communication and mutual benefit, they reduce the likelihood that loyalty will erode. Equally important is managing your own expectations. When you accept that people's commitments can change, you become less vulnerable to sudden disappointment. Instead of assuming relationships will remain exactly as they are, you remain attentive to shifts in behavior and attitude. This awareness allows you to adapt more gracefully when circumstances evolve. At the same time, the law of fickleness does not suggest that genuine loyalty is impossible. Some relationships endure for decades precisely because both individuals invest effort into maintaining them. Trust grows through shared experiences, mutual respect, and consistent reliability. The difference is that enduring loyalty does not rely solely on emotional intensity. It develops through repeated actions that reinforce commitment over time. Perhaps the most valuable lesson of this law is the importance of cultivating inner stability rather than depending entirely on external support. When your sense of purpose and confidence depends too heavily on the approval or loyalty of others, shifts in those relationships can feel devastating. But when you maintain a strong internal foundation, changes in external alliances become easier to navigate. In the end, the law of fickleness reveals an important truth about human nature. People are constantly evolving, and their loyalties evolve with them. Understanding this reality allows you to approach relationships with greater awareness and maturity. Instead of expecting permanence in a world defined by change, you learn to build connections based on honesty, mutual benefit, and resilience. Through this understanding, loyalty becomes not a fragile promise but a dynamic relationship that must be nurtured continually as circumstances unfold. There is a force within human nature that many people prefer not to acknowledge. It is intense, restless, and sometimes frightening because it does not fit comfortably with the image most individuals want to have of themselves. People like to believe they are calm, rational, and peaceful beings. Yet beneath that surface lies another powerful current, aggressive energy. It appears in moments of anger, competition, ambition, and confrontation. It fuels arguments, conflicts, rivalries, and sometimes even great achievements. Robert Greene refers to this hidden force as the law of aggression. Aggression is often misunderstood because people associate it immediately with violence or hostility. But aggression, in its broader psychological sense, is simply a form of intense energy directed toward asserting oneself in the world. It is the impulse to overcome obstacles, to push boundaries, to defend territory, to compete, and to pursue goals with determination. Without some form of aggressive energy, human beings would struggle to survive or accomplish meaningful change. The problem is not aggression itself, it is the way people handle it. From an evolutionary perspective, aggression once served essential purposes. Early humans lived in environments filled with danger and scarcity. They had to defend resources, protect their families, and compete for survival. The ability to respond quickly and forcefully to threats could determine whether someone lived or died. Over thousands of years, these instincts became deeply embedded in human psychology. Even though modern societies are far less physically dangerous, the emotional mechanisms that generate aggressive responses still exist. Because modern cultures often discourage open expressions of aggression, many people attempt to suppress it entirely. They tell themselves they should always remain calm, polite, and agreeable. While self-control is important, complete suppression of aggressive impulses can create unexpected consequences. When aggression is ignored or denied, it does not disappear. Instead, it accumulates beneath the surface, gradually building tension within the mind. Eventually, this pressure may release itself through sudden outbursts of anger, passive-aggressive behavior, or subtle resentment toward others. You can observe this dynamic in everyday situations. Someone who constantly avoids confrontation may eventually explode in frustration after a series of minor irritations. Another person might express aggression indirectly through sarcasm, criticism, or competitive hostility. In some cases, suppressed aggression turns inward and manifests as self-criticism or destructive habits. When people refuse to acknowledge their aggressive energy, it often emerges in distorted or unhealthy forms. The key insight behind the law of aggression is that this energy must be understood and channeled rather than denied. Aggression can become a destructive force when it is uncontrolled, but it can also become a powerful engine for growth when directed consciously. Many of humanity's greatest accomplishments have been driven by individuals who transformed aggressive impulses into determination and creative drive. Consider the role of aggression in ambition. When someone feels a strong desire to overcome obstacles or prove their abilities, that motivation often contains an element of aggressive energy. Athletes pushing their physical limits, entrepreneurs building new ventures, and artists striving to create something extraordinary all rely on a form of assertive intensity. This energy allows them to persist through challenges that would discourage others. Competition provides another example. Healthy competition channels aggressive impulses into structured environments where individuals can test their abilities without causing harm. Sports, intellectual debates, and professional challenges allow people to express determination and intensity while respecting rules that prevent destructive conflict. These activities transform aggression into motivation and discipline. Understanding your own aggressive impulses begins with honest observation. Notice the moments when irritation, frustration, or competitiveness arises. Instead of judging these feelings immediately, examine what they reveal. Often, aggression signals that something important is at stake, perhaps a boundary has been crossed. A goal feels threatened, or a sense of fairness has been violated. When you interpret aggression as information rather than simply as a negative emotion, you gain insight into your deeper motivations. Learning to pause before reacting is another important skill. Aggressive impulses often appear suddenly and intensely. Acting on them immediately can escalate conflicts and create consequences that are difficult to reverse. By pausing briefly, you create space to decide how to direct that energy. Instead of reacting impulsively, you can choose responses that align with long-term goals. Physical activity also provides a healthy outlet for aggressive energy. Exercise, martial arts, competitive sports, and other demanding physical pursuits allow the body to release tension in constructive ways. These activities help transform emotional intensity into strength and resilience rather than frustration. Creative work offers another powerful channel. Many writers, musicians, and innovators describe their work as a way of transforming emotional intensity into expression. Aggressive energy can fuel persistence, focus, and originality when directed toward meaningful creation. Instead of suppressing the impulse to push against limitations, creative work allows individuals to reshape that impulse into something valuable. Equally important is learning to recognize aggression in others without reacting defensively. When people feel threatened or frustrated, their behavior may become sharp or confrontational. Responding with equal hostility often intensifies the situation, but understanding that aggression frequently reflects underlying stress or insecurity allows you to respond with greater composure. By remaining calm while acknowledging the other person's concerns, you can often diffuse tension before it escalates. Ultimately, the law of aggression reminds you that this powerful force is part of human nature. Attempting to eliminate it entirely is neither realistic nor beneficial. Instead, the goal is to develop awareness and discipline so that aggressive energy becomes a tool rather than a threat. When directed blindly, aggression can damage relationships and create unnecessary conflict. But when guided by intention and self-control, the same energy becomes a source of courage, determination, and creative power. In this sense, aggression resembles fire. Left unattended, it can destroy everything around it. But when contained and directed carefully, it provides warmth, energy, and transformation. The difference lies not in the existence of the fire, but in how it is managed. By understanding this force within yourself, you gain the ability to shape it into something constructive rather than allowing it to erupt unpredictably. If you listen carefully to conversations between different age groups, you will often notice a recurring pattern. Older generations sometimes complain that younger people lack discipline, patience, or respect for tradition. Younger generations, in turn, may see their elders as rigid, outdated, or resistant to change. Each side often feels convinced that their perspective is the more reasonable one. Yet what both groups rarely recognize is that their viewpoints are shaped by something deeper than individual personality or intelligence. They are shaped by the era in which they grew up. This invisible filter is what Robert Greene calls the law of generational myopia. Generational myopia refers to the tendency of individuals to interpret the world primarily through the experiences and assumptions formed during their formative years. Every generation grows up within a unique historical environment. Economic conditions, technological changes, political events, and cultural values create a particular atmosphere that influences how people understand reality. These early experiences leave lasting psychological impressions. They shape expectations about work, relationships, authority, and success. Over time, these impressions become so familiar that individuals assume they represent universal truths rather than the product of a specific moment in history. Consider how dramatically the world can change within a single generation. Someone who grew up during periods of scarcity or economic hardship may develop a strong emphasis on stability, cohesion, and long-term security. They may value steady employment, careful saving, and loyalty to established institutions. In contrast, individuals who grew up in times of rapid innovation and technological expansion may feel more comfortable with risk and constant change. They may prioritize creativity, flexibility, and independence over stability. Neither perspective is inherently right or wrong. Each reflects the conditions that shaped it. The problem arises when people assume their generational viewpoint represents objective reality. When individuals interpret the present solely through the lens of their past experiences, they may struggle to understand why others think differently. Older generations might interpret new cultural behaviors as signs of decline or irresponsibility, while younger generations may dismiss traditional values as irrelevant or restrictive. In both cases, the disagreement is not simply about ideas. It reflects the deeper influence of different historical environments. Technology often amplifies these generational differences. Each wave of technological advancement alters the way people communicate, learn, and organize their lives. For individuals who grew up before certain technologies existed, these changes can feel disruptive or unnatural. Meanwhile, younger generations who have never known a world without these tools may see them as ordinary parts of daily life. This gap in experience can create misunderstandings about how work, relationships, and creativity should function in the modern world. Generational myopia also affects how societies respond to major social and political challenges. Leaders and decision-makers often rely on strategies that worked in the past, assuming those solutions will continue to apply. However, conditions rarely remain the same. Economic systems evolve, cultural priorities shift, and new technologies transform entire industries. When leaders remain attached to outdated assumptions, they risk overlooking emerging opportunities or dangers. In this way, generational perspective can become a blind spot that prevents adaptation. You can observe this pattern repeatedly throughout history. Established institutions sometimes resist change because their leaders interpret new ideas through the framework of earlier experiences. Meanwhile, younger innovators push forward with approaches that reflect the realities of their own time. Tension between these perspectives is almost inevitable. Yet when both sides refuse to acknowledge the influence of generational bias, conflict becomes more intense and productive dialogue becomes more difficult. Understanding the law of generational myopia begins with recognizing that every generation carries both strengths and limitations. Older generations often possess valuable historical knowledge and practical wisdom gained through experience. They have witnessed cycles of success and failure that younger individuals may not yet understand. At the same time, younger generations often bring fresh perspectives that allow them to recognize opportunities invisible to those accustomed to older systems. Innovation frequently emerges from individuals who are less attached to traditional assumptions. The key challenge is learning to see beyond the boundaries of your own generational perspective. This requires humility and curiosity. Instead of assuming that your experiences represent the complete picture, consider how different historical conditions might shape alternative viewpoints. Ask yourself whether certain beliefs you hold are universal truths or simply reflections of the environment in which you grew up. Dialogue between generations becomes particularly valuable in this process. Conversations with people who have lived through different eras can reveal insights that no single generation possesses alone. Older individuals may offer context about long-term patterns, while younger individuals may highlight emerging trends and possibilities. When these perspectives combine, understanding becomes deeper and more balanced. Another important step is studying history. Historical awareness allows you to see how dramatically human societies have changed across time. Practices that once seemed permanent often disappear within a few decades. Values that once felt revolutionary eventually become ordinary. Recognizing these patterns helps you understand that your current worldview is part of an ongoing evolution rather than a fixed standard. Flexibility of thought is equally important. The ability to adapt your assumptions as circumstances change prevents generational bias from becoming rigid dogma. Instead of defending your perspective simply because it feels familiar, you remain open to adjusting your views when new evidence appears. This intellectual flexibility allows you to navigate a rapidly changing world with greater clarity. Ultimately, the law of generational myopia reminds you that every human perspective is shaped by time. None of us observes reality from a completely neutral position. Our ideas, values, and expectations carry the imprint of the historical moment in which we were formed. Recognizing this influence does not weaken your understanding, it expands it. When you acknowledge the limits of your generational viewpoint, You gain the ability to learn from other eras, other experiences, and other minds. In doing so, you move closer to a broader form of wisdom, one that sees beyond the narrow horizon of a single generation and recognizes the continuous unfolding of human history. Let me ask you something directly, and I want you to pause for a moment and truly feel the weight of it. One day, your life will end, not in some distant philosophical sense, not as an abstract idea you can push away, but as a simple biological reality. Your time here is limited. Every breath you take, every year that passes, quietly moves you closer to that inevitable point. Yet here is the strange thing about human nature. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this truth. They push it to the edges of their awareness, treating death as something distant, something that happens only to others. This quiet avoidance is what Robert Greene calls the law of death denial. Human beings are perhaps the only creatures on Earth that can fully imagine their own mortality. Animals sense danger and struggle to survive, but they do not sit in quiet moments contemplating the certainty of their eventual death. The human mind does. We possess the rare and unsettling ability to understand that our lives are temporary. This awareness creates a profound psychological tension. On one hand, we want to live freely, dream boldly, and imagine endless possibilities. On the other hand, we know that time is finite. To reduce this tension, the mind develops a powerful defense mechanism. It pretends that death is not truly relevant to the present moment. This denial appears in many forms. Some people distract themselves constantly with activity, entertainment, and endless goals, so they never have to reflect on the deeper meaning of their existence. Others cling to the illusion that there will always be more time later, more time to pursue their dreams, repair relationships, or discover their true purpose. The future becomes a comfortable place where everything important will eventually happen. Yet the future quietly transforms into the present, and the present slips into the past faster than most people realize. Ironically, the attempt to ignore death often leads to a less meaningful life. When people assume time is abundant, they postpone the things that truly matter. They delay creative ambitions because the moment never feels urgent enough. They avoid difficult conversations because there will always be another opportunity. They remain in situations that drain their energy because change can always happen tomorrow. In this way, death denial creates a subtle complacency that allows years to pass without conscious direction. Yet when you confront mortality honestly, something remarkable happens. The awareness that life is finite sharpens your perception of what truly matters. Trivial distractions lose some of their power. Complaints that once felt important begin to seem insignificant compared to the limited time available to experience the world. The question gradually shifts from, "How do I fill my time?" to, "How do I use my time wisely?" Many philosophers and spiritual traditions have long recognized this paradox. Instead of avoiding the thought of death, they encourage people to contemplate it regularly. Ancient Stoic thinkers practiced what they called memento mori, a Latin phrase meaning "remember that you will die." This practice was not intended to create fear or despair. Instead, it served as a reminder of life's preciousness. By remembering the inevitability of death, individuals were encouraged to live more deliberately, appreciating each moment rather than drifting through it unconsciously. When you truly accept mortality, your priorities begin to reorganize themselves. You become more aware of how you spend your energy and attention. Activities that once seemed urgent may reveal themselves as empty routines. Meanwhile, experiences that deepen understanding, learning, creating, connecting with others gain greater significance. The awareness of time's limits transforms everyday choices into meaningful decisions. Relationships often change under this perspective as well. When you remember that the people around you also have limited time, your interactions become more intentional. Petty conflicts feel less worthwhile when viewed through the lens of mortality. Gratitude and empathy become easier to express because you understand that every encounter is temporary. Moments that might otherwise pass unnoticed, shared laughter, quiet conversation, simple presence gain a deeper emotional resonance. Confronting mortality also strengthens courage. Fear of failure often loses its grip when you realize that the greater risk is wasting your life without pursuing what truly matters. Many individuals delay meaningful goals because they worry about embarrassment, rejection, or uncertainty. But when the reality of death becomes clear, these fears begin to shrink. The question becomes less about avoiding mistakes and more about ensuring that your life reflects your authentic aspirations. Creativity often flourishes under this awareness. Artists, writers, scientists, and innovators frequently describe a sense of urgency in their work. They recognize that the time available to contribute something meaningful is limited. This recognition fuels persistence and focus. Instead of waiting for perfect conditions, they begin creating with the time they have. At the same time, acknowledging mortality does not mean living in constant anxiety about death. The goal is not to become obsessed with the end of life, but to use that awareness as a compass guiding present choices. When you accept that time is finite, each day becomes more vivid. Experiences feel richer because you recognize their uniqueness. Ordinary moments gain quiet significance because they are part of a life that will not repeat itself. The law of death denial ultimately reveals a powerful truth about human psychology. The thing we most try to avoid thinking about may be the very thing that gives life its deepest meaning. By confronting mortality rather than ignoring it, you reclaim the urgency that allows life to be lived fully. You begin choosing your actions more carefully, your relationships more intentionally, and your ambitions more honestly. In the end, death is not simply an ending waiting in the distance. It is also a reminder that life is happening right now. The awareness of mortality does not diminish existence, it intensifies it. Every breath, every conversation, every opportunity becomes more valuable because it exists within the brief and extraordinary window of time that you have been given.